Hello everyone. So just we came into the third video of threads in Java video series. So far we discussed how we can create a thread and what is thread and what are the difference between threads and process based multitasking. So last time we discussed how you can create a thread by extending thread class, right? So that was first way of creating a thread. So now today we are going to discuss the second way of creating a thread, which is implements runnable interface. So in the first video, we discussed what is the disadvantage and advantage over one over the other, because if you go with the thread extend approach, so you will lose your hierarchy of your class. For example, if you trying to extend runner or swimmer class from the thread class, so you lose the relationship swimmer is a man, man is a human, that type of inheritance relationship. So if you are not sure about that, go and watch the first video about thread discussion, then we can come into this video. So anyway, if you remember that, let's move on. How you can create thread using implement runnable interface. So this is the program we ended in the last video, right? You remember we created a printer class and we created the main method and other application class to invoke that thread class, otherwise the printer class which extend the thread. So today what we are going to do is, we are going to instead of extend from the thread class, I am going to implement from runnable interface. So now you can see here, right? So already we have run method, right? If you don't have it, it will enforce you to do it, right? We discussed this before. You can skip creating a run method if you extend from the thread, but if you implement from runnable interface, you must you must override the run method, right? So that's we discussed already. So however, you can see here the current thread method is already says I can't do that, because you need to understand this concept. Thread class, the current thread class method is belong to thread class, but when you come from the runnable interface, you don't have that behavior, right? So you need this in little later. So for now I am going to just remove it and keep like this, right? So now I am go back to my application class, right? So you can see here printer equal new printer, right? So now forget about this daemon, right? So just remove it, that from our last video. So printer dot start method is not there, right? So now why printer dot start method is not there? Because start method is belongs to thread class, that we discussed already in the last video, right? So however, this time we don't have a thread class. Instead of that, we have a implements from runnable interface. We implement from runnable. So now when you implement from the runnable, it is coming, runnable is interface. It doesn't contain any implemented methods, right? So last time we extend from a thread class, what happens is your class extend from the thread class, thread implements runnable. End of the day, it's coming from the runnable. However, what we did is we have intermediate class which is called thread, and thread class implemented all useful method from the runnable interface, right? So now in this case we don't have this intermediate thread class, so we don't have someone to implement this start method, right? So if you go back and check the runnable class, runnable interface, I'm sorry. So you can see it is just, it's a SAM interface, single abstract method interface, right? So you will see it has a method called run, that's it. It does not have any other method. So there is no way I get the start method in between. So now what I can do? So what I can do is here I can create instance from the thread class, right, equal new thread, right. So when you create a thread object from the thread class, you can pass runnable instance for that, right. So I am going to pass here is a printer, right. So I am going to pass this as a printer. So now printer is my runnable class, right. So instead of that printer dot start, I am going to say hey thread dot start. So, now what happening here, you remember last time when you just say thread dot start, it did nothing because it just invoked the run method, right. So, now what happening here, you have a printer class is implements runnable interface, right. So, printer class is implements runnable interface. So, I think I am missing one curse brace here, right. So, we create a thread class instance here. When we create that instance, we pass our instance from the runnable interface, right. That means we pass printer instance. So, now we say thread dot start. So, we will see what's happened here when you execute this, right. So, you go back here and you execute this one, right. So, you will see here still it create child threads and the main thread, right. So, this time it run the main first, right. So, let us run again, right. So, now you can see in the mixed mode the usual expected output, but the point here, so when you implement something from the runnable interface, if your class implement the runnable interface to give the thread behavior, that class does not have any start method to invoke. So, what you are supposed to do, you have to create the instance from the thread class and then you have to pass your runnable to that, right. So, this is how you can create threads in a second approach, which means implement from runnable interface. So, now we got, right. So, here you can see thread equal new thread and we pass runnable interface to that. So, that means that tells us thread class has more than one constructors, right. So, last time we created a default constructor, if you remember last example we use a default constructor, right. So, this time we pass runnable object into the constructor, right. So, thread class has multiple constructors, as I remember it has some around 8 constructors, right. So, one is this thread is so first one is thread t equal new thread, right. So, this is the first constructor. Second constructor, you can create a thread class by passing runnable object, right. So, third way you can create a thread by just passing name for that thread, right. So, you can pass name for that thread, right. So, that is the other way of creating a thread. Okay. So, there is a other way you can create a thread by passing runnable object as well as a name for a thread, right. So, you can pass a name for the thread or you can pass the also you can pass the runnable objects. Now, we have 4 ways to create. So, there are other around 4 other ways to create a thread. For example, so you can create a thread by passing a thread group, right. So, you can pass thread here. So, you can pass a thread group here, right. So, new thread group, right, and you can pass some other name here, right. So, this is not how you are going to handle the thread groups. I am coming to that topic later, but just to give you an idea how this works, right. So, then there is other constructor, right. So, you can pass thread group as well as runnable interface, right. So, you can pass thread group, right, as well as runnable interface, right. So, you can pass the printer here, right. So, you can do that too, right. So, there is a other way, right. So, let us say this is T5, this is T6. There is other way you can do this. You can pass thread group runnable interface as well as the string name, right. So, you can pass a name here, right. So, there is other ways to create this thread like this, this is little bit different, right. So, this is again we yet to discuss. You can pass a thread group here, right, and also you can pass a runnable object here, right, and also you can pass name here, string name here, also you can pass stack size. So, stack size is something we are going to probably discuss in later, or you know already. So, every thread in JVM it has a stack, right. So, every thread is create a stack, then each thread execute by that each method execute by that thread create a frame inside that stack, right. So, this is how it's work. Like for example, when you get the main thread, right, the main thread create a stack, right, and then main method will create as a frame in the stack. If the main method create a call a print method, it create a other frame in the stack. If the print method call something do something method, so that do something method will create other frame in the stack, right. So, like that you have a stack, right. So, you can define the stack size also while you are creating a thread, right. So, now we have 8 different ways how you can create thread, right. Okay. So, likewise this is the second way of how you can create thread, right. So, for last video we learned how to create a thread using extending a thread class. Today we learn how to create a thread using implements runnable interface, and also how you can invoke, how you can execute, how you can start that thread, right. So, it is little bit different because still we need a thread class instance. Okay. So, next video we are going to talk about thread priorities, right. This is little bit important, thread priorities. Then subscribe to this channel if you are not already subscribed, because that will give you a continuous feed about these videos, and also click on that bell icon, so it will give an instant notification. Also like to my Facebooks and Instagram. So, stay in touch, see you soon in next video.